The faded, mismatched furniture in Roman's living room stood witness to years of wear and tear. A once red recliner had sun-faded patches, and the squeak of the ceiling fan was a constant, if not endearing, noise in the background. The windows were closed, but the gauzy curtains still managed to flutter with every passing vehicle, casting wavy patterns of sunlight across the floor. Roman sat on the edge of a worn-out sofa, fingers playing with the edge of a sealed off-white envelope. The sharp lettering on the front read, "Rito, Mr. Roman T. Whitmore." Taking a deep breath, Roman muttered to himself, "All right, let's see what crap they've come up with now." He tore the envelope open with a sort of savage indifference, half expecting another notice about his recent firing or perhaps a final reminder of his duties. But what he pulled out made him freeze. A check, and not just any check. The figure on it made his eyebrows jump near his receding hairline. "No way in hell," he whispered, flipping the check around as if expecting to find some catch on the back. But there was nothing, just the sterile watermark of the company. He leaned back laughing, a deep, cynical chortle. Damn, they really messed up this time. Probably meant to send this to the CEO's vacation fund. Holding the check up, he toasted an imaginary audience. Cheers to corporate blunders. But as the initial shock wore off, Roman's face darkened. Or is this blood money? He remembered the accident at the factory, the faces of his colleagues, and the ever-looming figure of his boss. The smile faded, replaced with a tight, pained frown. Suddenly, the front door swung open, and the room was filled with the sound of children playing and cars honking from the street outside. Julia, Roman's wife, stepped in, carrying a bag of groceries. Seeing the look on Roman's face, she asked, "What happened, Rome? Did they send a hitman after you or something?" Roman held up the check without a word, watching Julia's reaction. She squinted at it. Are there too many zeros on that?" He nodded slowly. "Seems like our misfortunes have a silver lining, or maybe gold." Julia sat next to him, taking the check gently, fingers tracing the numbers. It's a lot, Roman. What are we going to do?" Roman took a deep breath, looking around the modest room that bore marks of years of struggle. "Whatever the hell we want," he responded, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. "But first, let's figure out why the devils are suddenly feeling generous." The check was both a beacon of hope and a reminder of a darker past. The question remained, at what cost had this windfall come? The relentless hum of machinery pervaded the air at the Gloria's Glassworks, where molten glass was blown and molded into various shapes and sizes, glowing red, orange as it danced in the hands of skilled workers. Rows upon rows of gleaming glassware stood in testament to the artistry and diligence of the factory's craftsmen. Roman, with his gray-streaked hair, walked along the factory floor with an aura of authority. His piercing gaze, accentuated by his safety goggles, scanned every corner, every person, ensuring protocols were followed. A worn-out badge on his jumpsuit read, "Roman, Safety Manager." "Hey, Roman. Think this is safe enough?" Mick, a burly worker with a crooked grin, held up a ludicrously long and wobbly glass vase, winking. "Put that abomination back in the furnace before it impales someone." "Mick," Roman retorted, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. Another worker, Sophia, piped up from her station. "If Roman had his way, we'd all be working in bubble wrap suits." Roman chuckled. "Don't tempt me, Sophia. I might consider it." But amidst the banter and camaraderie, there was an underlying tension. The factory had been pushing for higher output recently, cutting corners and bypassing some safety measures. The workers felt it. Roman definitely felt it. The day's monotony was shattered by a scream. "Help! Somebody help!" Time seemed to freeze as all heads turned towards the conveyor belt. A man's coat had gotten caught in the machinery, and he was being dragged mercilessly along its path. Panic set in among the onlookers. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" bellowed Roman. But the machines roared defiantly, drowning out his orders. A few brave souls darted forward, attempting to reverse the belt or free the man. But in mere moments, he was yanked out of sight, dragged into the machine before anyone could fully comprehend what was happening. Roman, his face a mask of horror, acted quickly. "Medic!" he yelled, rushing to the woman's side. "Someone call an ambulance! Now!" The aftermath was a blur of sirens, medics, and distraught workers. Roman stood in the middle, trying to coordinate the relief efforts, his face pale. But his voice never wavered. Hours later, with the injured taken off sight, Roman sat alone amidst the debris. Sophia approached, her clothes bloody. "You did everything you could, Roman." He looked up, tears forming but not falling. She sighed. The bosses, their demands. It was bound to happen. Roman slammed his fist against a table. "I should have fought harder." Made them listen. A moment of silence lingered between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Sophia whispered, "We're with you, Roman. Always." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the factory in shadows, Roman was left to grapple with the weight of responsibility, guilt, and a system that seemed stacked against safety and sensibility. The hum of the refrigerator filled the otherwise silent kitchen. The check lay flat on the table, the weight of its value more significant than its physical presence. An old scratched teapot, a remnant of their early married days, sat in the middle, steam wafting upwards in a delicate spiral. Julia's fingers clutched a chipped mug, the bright floral print contrasting with her pale, veined hand, which trembled ever so slightly. Roman, looking uncharacteristically sheepish, cleared his throat. A slow grin spread across Roman's face. "We could travel, Jules. See Paris or Rome. Hell, even buy that RV you always wanted and roam around the country." Julia laughed, a light, fluttery sound. "I could get a new set of porcelain. Something without cracks." As she chuckled, her hand moved to pour more tea, but faltered, a splash landing on the table. Roman caught it, covering her hand with his. "You okay?" She pulled back, attempting nonchalance. "Just clumsy. Always have been." They continued listing out their desires, the mundane and the extravagant. New curtains for the living room, Julia mused, and perhaps a trip to the spa. "A fishing trip for me. And maybe we could finally renovate the bathroom, make it safer for you. You know, install those bars," Roman proposed, his voice tinged with concern. Julia smirked, "Trying to tell me I'm getting old, Ro." He grinned. "We're both relics, darling." Their laughter filled the room, but Roman noticed, as Julia was mid-laugh, a blankness crossed her face, like a cloud covering the sun. It was gone in a flash, replaced with her usual spark. "You ever think," she started, pausing to find the words, "that maybe this is the universe giving us a break after everything?" Roman nodded, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe, just maybe." Julia leaned in, resting her head against his chest. "So many dreams, Ro." He kissed the top of her head, the weight of her statement heavy in the room. The two sat in companionable silence, lost in dreams of what might come and the unspoken fears that lingered at the edges. The check lay between them, a ticket to dreams and a reminder of life's fragility. Julia's once sturdy hands now fumbled more than they grasped. She attempted to open a jar of pickles, her fingers slipping and sliding around the lid. Frustration creased her brow. "Damn it, why won't this thing budge?" she muttered. From the doorway, Roman watched, his eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. Concern, love, a touch of pity that he would never dare show openly. "Need a hand there?" he asked, feigning nonchalance, but the slight quiver in his voice betrayed him. Julia shot him a glance, her pride momentarily wounded. "I've been opening jars since before you knew the difference between a wrench and a hammer, mister." He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "That you have. Just offering." She finally relinquished the jar, placing it on the counter with a huff. "Fine, Mr. Muscles. Show me how it's done." Roman opened it with a bit of effort, handing it back with a triumphant smirk. "There you go, madam." Julia snorted, plucking a pickle out. "Thank you. But next time, no gloating." As days blended into weeks, Roman noticed more. The way Julia paused at the foot of the stairs, as if gauging her energy to climb. How she'd wince lightly when kneading the dough for their weekly bread, making ritual. The dark circles under her eyes, no matter how long she slept. One evening, as the sun cast a warm golden hue throughout their living room, Roman found Julia staring at an old photograph of them in their younger days, her fingers tracing the outline of their smiling faces. "We were so full of life," she whispered. "We still are," he replied, taking a seat beside her. She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I'm not, Ro. Every day, it's like a part of me fades away." He swallowed hard, the knot in his throat making it difficult to speak. "Jules, we'll get through this. We always do." Julia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's different this time." A heavy silence hung between them. "Listen," Roman began, gripping her hand. "We've got that money now. We'll go see specialists, get the best treatment. You're not in this alone." Julia chuckled. "You and your solutions." Roman raised an eyebrow. "Well, someone's got to be the problem solver." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I just want to make the most of what's left, Ro." He kissed her temple. "Then that's what we'll do. Every damn second of it." The evening sun continued its descent, painting the room in deep shades of orange and red. But in that moment, amidst the weight of the unknown, Roman and Julia found solace in each other's company. The scent of motor oil and the rusty clang of tools stirred memories within Roman. The beat-up RV, that palace on wheels, where he and his father shared laughter and stories. The world outside their window always changing. The life he tasted before the factory consumed him. "I remember those summers," Roman began, a touch of nostalgia in his voice, his eyes distant. "Every corner we turned, there was something new. Dad used to say the RV was our magic carpet." Julia, stirring a pot on the stove, glanced over her shoulder. Her interest piqued. "A magic carpet? I thought you just went to tacky roadside attractions and ate junk food." Roman smirked. "Well, there was that too, but it felt like freedom, Jules. Like the whole world was ours for the taking." Julia turned off the stove and approached the table, her face contemplative. "You know, we never did have a proper honeymoon." Roman raised an eyebrow. "Why not? You, me, and the open road. We can visit all those cheesy places you keep telling me about." She coughed lightly, disguising the tremor in her voice. "While we still can." Roman reached across the table, capturing her hand. "And maybe some of the spots we've only ever dreamed of." Julia's face lit up, imagining the possibilities. The Grand Canyon at sunrise, the redwoods, the coastlines. Roman interrupted, a sly grin forming. She swatted at him playfully. "Only if we also find the world's most oversized pancake." He leaned back, chuckling. "Deal. But seriously, Jules, maybe this is what we need. Some fresh air, a change of scenery. Might do you some good, yeah?" She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. There was a palpable energy between them, a mix of anticipation and trepidation. To the open road, Roman toasted, lifting an imaginary glass. Julia mirrored the gesture, her voice firm, to whatever lies ahead. The RV dealership stretched out like a maze of possibilities, each vehicle promising a new adventure, a potential memory. A burly salesman with a comb-over and a stained tie that had seen better days approached them, an overly rehearsed smile plastered on his face. "Good day, folks. I'm Barry. Looking for a home on wheels?" Roman shot Julia a glance, smirking. Something that won't break down after the first pothole and has more character than a cardboard box. Barry chuckled, a bit uneasily. "You're in luck." Julia's gaze drifted to a vintage RV. It's paint-chipped, but with a sense of stories untold. "What about that one? Looks like it's seen a few adventures." Barry grimaced. "Oh, that old thing. It's been here for ages. You'd probably want something newer, more reliable." Roman approached the vintage model, intrigued. The trio stepped in, and the RV came alive. The wood paneling exuded warmth, the seats worn but inviting. The scent of past travels filled the air, a mix of campfire, pine, and mystery. Roman's fingers traced the patterns of an old road map stuck to the fridge. "Feels like it's seen the world." Julia sank into a seat, imagining the places they could go. "It has a soul. You can't buy that in a new model." Barry, sensing a sail slipping, interjected. "It's quaint. Sure. But the newer models have all the mod. Cons, Wi-Fi, satellite TV, automatic everything." Roman chuckled. "We're looking to disconnect from all that jazz, Barry." Julia winked at Roman. "Plus, what's life without a little uncertainty? Keeps things interesting." Barry sighed, realizing he was beaten. All right. Let's talk numbers." After a round of intense haggling, dotted with Roman's sarcastic jabs and Julia's sharp wit, they struck a deal. As they finalized the paperwork, Roman turned to Julia. "Here's to the open road, to getting lost and finding ourselves." Julia leaned in, sealing the deal with a kiss. "And to our old new home." The room was dim, curtains half drawn against the oppressive morning sun. The sound of distant traffic crept in, a gentle reminder of the world beyond their walls. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted in a testament to last night's fitful sleep. Julia sat at the dressing table, an array of orange bottles lined up before her like a small, mocking audience. She uncapped one, shaking 2 pills into her palm with practiced precision. "You know," she began, her voice dripping with that distinctive Julia brand of sarcasm, "if I took all these at once, I reckon I'd either gain superpowers or end up in the ear. 50-50 odds." Roman glanced up from lacing his shoes, a smirk playing on his lips. "Given our luck, you'd probably just end up constipated." Julia laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. "You always know how to paint a picture, don't you?" Taking a sip of water, she downed the pills. The simple act seemed so mechanical, but its significance wasn't lost on either of them. She pointed a finger towards Roman's nightstand, where his own pill bottle lay. "Or turn, old man. Or do I need to chase you down in force? Feed you?" Roman rolled his eyes, reaching for his meds. "You make it sound so romantic." As he swallowed, his gaze caught their reflection in the mirror. Side by side, wrinkles mapping out a life lived fully, but also one that bore the weight of time's inexorable march. "You ever think about how we got here?" Roman mused, tapping the pill bottle. "Feels like just yesterday we were dancing at Woodstock, invincible. And now we're..." Julia reached over, placing a hand on his. Her fingers, cold and slightly trembling, belied the strength they still held. "We're still dancing, Roman. The music's just changed." He turned, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. She smiled, the weight of years and pain momentarily forgotten. "Good, because I have a feeling this next chapter is going to be quite the trip." Roman's study was a haven of memories, a place filled with dusty old books, photos from forgotten eras, and trinkets that spoke volumes of adventures past. But as Roman rummaged through the drawers, what he sought wasn't a token of nostalgia, but something far more tangible. With a soft click, a drawer opened to reveal a gleaming pistol. He stared at it for a beat, the weight of memories pulling him back. "You gotta protect her, Roman," a gruff voice echoed in his mind. It was Frankie, his longtime friend and confidant. They were in this very study years ago, following an incident that had shaken Roman to his core. Roman's face darkened as he recalled that evening. The unsettling knock on the door, the masked figure demanding valuables, and Julia's scream, piercing the night. Frankie, ever the pragmatist, had handed him the gun afterward. "Hope you never have to use it," he'd said. "But if push comes to shove, it's better to have it and not need it." Roman had hoped he'd never have to revisit that decision. But the world wasn't always kind to hopeful men. He gently took the pistol, tucking it into a discreet compartment in his bag. The landline rang, disrupting his thoughts. Roman answered, recognizing the voice on the other end immediately. "Dad? You guys all packed and ready?" Roman smirked, glancing at the gun. "More or less. You know me, always packing." A brief pause. Packing. Books and stuff, right?" "Why, what else would I be talking about?" Roman teased, the playful tone not quite masking the truth beneath. A heavy sigh from the other end. "Just be careful, okay? Both of you." "Always, son." The call ended, leaving Roman alone with his thoughts and preparations. Safety was a double-edged sword. It promised protection, but came with its own set of chains. And Roman, ever the protector, bore those chains willingly, for Julia, for himself. The dashboard of the RV was a blend of past and present, analog dials mixed with digital displays, and in the center of it all, a sleek, matte black rectangle, etched with the glowing logo. Legion 600. "I still don't know about this thing," Roman muttered, reaching out tentatively, his fingertips brushing the touch. Sensitive screen. The screen lit up immediately, a serene female voice emanating from the speakers. "Welcome, Roman and Julia. Ready for your next adventure." Roman jumped back slightly. Damn thing knows our names. Julia, poring over a travel magazine in the back, chuckled. "It's just the settings. Love." "I set it up earlier. Quite intuitive, really." Roman squinted at the device. "You know, in my day, we used maps. Paper ones. None of this fancy voice. Telling you where to go stuff." Julia leaned over the back of his seat, her eyes twinkling. "And remember when we took that wrong turn and ended up in that nudist colony?" Roman smirked. "I recall you made quite a few friends that day." Julia laughed, a melodic sound that always made Roman's heart skip a beat. "Oh, please. The only thing I took away from that was a sunburn in very unfortunate places." She winked, her gaze drifting back to the Legion 600. "So, shall we give it a go? Let Legion take the lead." Roman sighed dramatically, his initial reservations mixing with the thrill of the unknown. All right. But if this thing tells me to drive off a cliff, I'm blaming you." Julia kissed his cheek. Duly noted. As Roman started the RV, the screen pulsated with a soft light. Destination set to. The unknown. Adventure awaits. Roman and Julia. Roman chuckled. Bit melodramatic for a G-piece, isn't it? Julia winked. "Oh, come on. Embrace the theatrics. After all, it's not the destination, it's the journey. With Legion." They both laughed as the RV roared to life, the open road beckoning. Little did they know just how unpredictable this journey, guided by Legion, would turn out to be. The setting sun bathed the room in a golden hue, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Roman stood near the window, clutching a worn-out notebook filled with scribbles and post. Julia was sprawled on the sofa, maps spread out before her, her fingertips tracing routes. "You sure you want to take the coastal route? With all the winding roads?" Roman asked, not looking up from his list. Julia smirked. "What's life without a little risk, eh? Besides, you've driven worse." Roman laughed. "Oh, the stories this old man can tell. Remember the mountain pass in '82? Felt like we were driving up to the pearly gates." Julia's laugh was more a snort. "I remember you swearing like a sailor when the brakes acted up." "Artistic expression during stressful times," he quipped, the playful glint in his eyes belying the weight he felt. The laughter died down as they both felt the gravity of the trip. It wasn't just any adventure. It was perhaps a last hurrah. Julia, sensing the shift in mood, changed the subject. "Did you pack all our meds?" Roman sighed, triple-checked. "Yours, mine, and even some for emergencies." He paused, running a hand through his silver hair. "You think we're overdoing it?" Julia looked him squarely in the eye, her expression steely. "We've earned this, Roman. Every damn mile. If we've learned anything, it's that life's unpredictable, but we decide how to play the cards we're dealt." He nodded, smiling weakly. "It's just—" She reached out, taking his hand. "It will be. We're together." The atmosphere in the room was thick with unsaid words, memories of better days, and the nagging uncertainties of the future. Suddenly, a thought struck Roman. Did we get that extra gas tank? Julia rolled her eyes. "Yes, Captain Paranoid. It's in the EERV, alongside your collection of Swiss Army knives and your dozen flashlights." Roman grinned sheepishly. A man can never be too prepared. "Or too paranoid," she shot back with a grin. As the evening melted into night, the RV stood tall outside, its silhouette illuminated by the porch light. The engine hummed softly, eager, ready. Julia, now standing by the door, took a deep breath. "Tomorrow, we hit the road, Roman." He stood beside her, sliding his arm around her waist to infinity and beyond. She chuckled. "Just the coast for now. But who knows where the winds might take us?" The RV stood tall and formidable, a fortress on wheels, equipped for the long journey ahead. But beside it was their trusty old car, a memory-laden companion they couldn't bear to leave behind. Roman and Julia went about connecting the car to the RV. Roman twisted and secured the tow bar, while Julia ensured that the brake lights of both vehicles synchronized, illuminating in tandem. She then double-checked the safety chains, making sure they formed a crisscross pattern beneath the tow bar. This formation ensured that in the unlikely event the main connection broke, the chains would support and prevent the car from veering into oncoming traffic. "You remember the first time we did this, Jules? Nearly took off the bumper," Roman chuckled, wiping the sweat from his brow. Julia laughed. "Oh, don't remind me. But look at us now, pros at it." Once they were satisfied with their handiwork, the duo climbed into the RV. The rearview mirror showed the car tailing obediently behind, as if it was an intrinsic part of their adventure tale. The ignition roared to life, and as the wheels began their steady turn, Roman remarked, "It's not just about the destination, but the journey and the memories we bring along." The car behind them stood as a testament to that sentiment. The RV's tires crunched on the gravel before finding purchase on the smooth asphalt. As the vehicle ate up the miles, the world outside shifted from suburban homes to the raw, untamed embrace of the open road. Patches of greens and yellows zipped by, interspersed with the azure of the sky reflected in snaking rivers. "Feels like we're in one of those classic road trip movies," Julia mused, her eyes gazing out at the world passing by. "Just missing a soundtrack." You up for some classic rock? Roman winked, reaching for the stereo. She smirked, her hand halting his, maybe later. Right now, the hum of the road is music enough. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the drone of the engine and the swish of trees a soothing background. You remember when we tried to act out Romeo and Juliet's in college? Roman asked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. You were a radiant Juliet, but I, on the other hand, was a Romeo with 2 left feet. Julia chuckled. Oh, I remember. You nearly dropped me during the balcony scene. But soft. What light through yonder window breaks? And then crash. Technically, it was more of a thud, Roman said defensively. She smirked, and yet here we are, Roman and Julia, not quite the tragic lovers. But we've had our share of adventures. Roman's gaze became thoughtful. You know, one line from that play always stayed with me. Swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb. Julia nodded. It's a caution against making promises based on something as changeable as the moon. We've seen our share of changing moons, haven't we? Every wrinkle, every gray hair, Roman replied, running a hand through his own silver strands. Yet here we are, swearing by our own inconstant moons. Their conversation took a deeper tone, touching on the vulnerabilities they'd seen in each other, the uncertainties of the future, and the certainties of the past. The road became a backdrop to their rich tapestry of shared experiences. You think old Shakespeare would have written about us? Julia asked playfully. Roman chuckled. Probably not. We're more of a comedy than a tragedy. Although with my driving, who knows? Julia swatted him lightly, her laughter echoing in the confines of the ERV. Just keep your eyes on the road, Romeo. And no more balcony scenes for you. As the RV sped on, the couple, cocooned within, shared laughter and memories, making new ones along the way. The road stretching out ahead, full of promises and possibilities. The golden hour cast a warm glow, the sun beginning its descent. Inside the RV, the earlier banter had faded, replaced by the weight of deeper thoughts. Julia took a sip from her travel mug, her eyes watching the patterns of light dancing on the dashboard. You know, Roman, it's almost funny. Our names. We're just one vowel away from being that ill-fated pair, aren't we? Roman glanced her way, smirking. Ah, but I'd argue we're the better love story. No feuding families, no secret marriages, no poison. Unless you count that expired can of beans you once tried to feed me, she interrupted with a teasing glint. He shuddered. That was a dark day, but it proves my point. We survived that. Surely we're doing better than those Verona kids. She chuckled softly. It's a tragic story, Romeo and Juliet, yet it's strangely magnetic. The intensity of young love, the trauma, the sacrifice. I often wondered if given a chance, would they make the same choices again? Would you, knowing the pitfalls, fall in love with me again? Without missing a beat, Roman replied in a heartbeat, over and over. Julia sighed, momentarily lost in the depth of the sentiment, then chuckled. You always had a way with words. It's almost as romantic as that line from the play. Swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon. Roman nodded. That's an interesting line. A warning about fleeting promises, perhaps. It always struck me as odd. Why not swear by something more stable? But then, again, what truly is constant? The moon waxes and wanes, Julia mused. Just like life. Just like love. Just like love. We've had our crescents and gibbous phases. The highs, the lows. And just like the moon, Roman added, we always come back to being full, complete, even after the darkest nights. She looked at him, a hint of moisture in her eyes. You think our love's like the moon then? Ever. Changing but constant in its own way? I do, Roman murmured, reaching out to squeeze her hand. And if ever I were to swear by it, I'd acknowledge its inconstancy, but cherish its presence. After all, without its phases, it wouldn't be the moon. Julia smiled softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. And without our phases, we wouldn't be us. The RV continued its journey, the sun now a mere whisper on the horizon, the moon beginning its ascent. The two lovers, bound by years and memories, drove on, united under the inconstant yet ever present glow of their love. The road stretched endlessly ahead, bordered on one side by nondescript factories, their tall chimneys churning out plumes of gray against the dusk sky. It was a sight that stirred something within Roman. You know, he started, his voice edged with a trace of nostalgia. Passing these factories reminds me of the early days. There was this new recruit I once trained. Lila, I think her name was. Bright-eyed, brimming with ideas. She reminded me so much of myself when I was her age. Julia tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to recall the name. Lila, the one with the short, raven-black hair. That's the one, Roman nodded. Came in like a whirlwind, wanting to change everything. She had this passion. She was going to make a difference, she said. He let out a chuckle, tinged with an unmistakable bitterness. But passion can sometimes blind you to dangers, especially in a place like the glass factory. Julia leaned back, taking a deep breath. You always took that safety role seriously, didn't you? Sometimes I think you cared more about the workers than the bosses ever did. I had to, Roman replied, a hard edge to his voice. With all the corners they cut, all the rules they wanted to bend for some extra bucks. Someone had to watch out for the little guys. There was a pause, and Julia nudged. Tell me about Lila. He sighed. I remember the day I was showing her the ropes. Literally. She was so eager to learn, absorbing every detail. But I could see she wasn't happy with some of the outdated equipment. She once told me, why don't we revolutionize the place? Mr. Roman, always so formal with that mister. Even though I told her 1,000,000 times just to call me Roman. And I warned her, Jules. I told her that this isn't some tech startup where you innovate every other week. Factories, especially ones like ours, they have their own rhythm, their own pace. You change one thing too quickly, and it can have a ripple effect. He clenched the steering wheel, but she had her own ideas, convinced that she could make things better. The silence that followed was dense, only punctuated by the hum of the RV engine. You did your best, Roman, Julia finally whispered, laying a gentle hand on his arm. He nodded, more to himself than to her. I did, but sometimes even your best isn't enough. Not when you're up against a system that values profit over people. The factories in the distance gradually receded, replaced by open fields. Yet the shadows of the past remained, looming large in the confines of the RV. A massive sign reading Gloria's Glassworks loomed overhead, and below it, the noisy churn of machinery mixed with the chatter of overworked employees. In the middle of the organized chaos was a woman with fiery red hair, clad in a pristine white suit that seemed almost defiant against the grime and dirt of the factory floor. Her heels clicked authoritatively against the concrete as she walked, surveying her empire. This was Felicia, and under her rule, the factory thrived. Speed it up, Anderson. We've got orders to fill. She snapped at a worker who was inspecting a sheet of freshly made glass. But ma'am, he protested, this batch has imperfections. See. He pointed to a hairline fracture running across the sheet. Felicia's eyes darted to the glass and then back to Anderson. It'll do. Most people won't even notice. Roman, clipboard in hand, watched the exchange from a distance. Every bone in his body told him to step in, to stand up for quality and safety. Taking a deep breath, he approached the pair. "Felicia," he began cautiously, "we've had this conversation before. It's not just about what the customer notices. It's about the safety of the product." Felicia's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smirk. "Ah, Roman, my eternal thorn. Always with the lectures. You know, sometimes I wonder if you're more interested in teaching a philosophy class than ensuring we hit our targets." Roman felt the familiar prickle of frustration. "It's not philosophy, Felicia. It's ethics and safety. If that glass shatters in a customer's home, it could be catastrophic." She scoffed, circling him as if he was a specimen under examination, always with the doom and gloom. "You need to relax. Maybe take a vacation." He met her glare evenly. "Maybe when you start valuing lives over ledger lines, I will." A low murmur ran through the workers who'd paused to watch the showdown. It was a dance they'd seen many times before. Felicia, with her laser focus on profits, and Roman, the ever-watchful guardian of safety and quality. "Maybe," she whispered menacingly, inches from his face, "it's time we find a safety officer who understands the business side of things." Roman's jaw tightened. "Maybe it's time you find a moral compass." A tense silence settled. Workers exchanged glances, anticipation in the air. The standoff, however, was interrupted by the blare of a machine malfunctioning. As both rushed towards the sound, it was clear. Their war was far from over, and beneath Felicia's rule, cracks, not just in the glass, were beginning to show. The hum of machinery was the soundtrack to their daily lives. It started as white noise, a background hum that faded into obscurity. But today, it morphed into a death knell. A shout pierced the monotony, followed by the screech of metal grinding against metal. The conveyor system had jammed, and Jake, the new hire that Roman had been training, was caught in it. His arm was pinned between two large gears, blood seeping out, and his face contorted in a blend of terror and pain. "Stop the line!" Roman yelled, rushing forward, his heart thundering in his chest. Workers scrambled in all directions, some rushing to help, others backing away in horror, while a few frozen in place. The factory's alarms blared, adding to the pandemonium. "Someone hit the emergency stop," Roman shouted. His eyes locked on Jake's pale face. Jake's eyes met his, filled with tears and terror. "Hold on, kid," Roman whispered, more to himself than to the injured man. Felicia, who had been in her office overlooking the factory floor, appeared, her face a mask of cold fury. What the hell happened? "No time," Roman snapped, his fingers slick with Jake's blood as he tried to free him from the machine's grip. But Felicia's calculating gaze was fixed elsewhere. "Move him. Get him off the floor. We can't let anyone see this." Roman looked at her in disbelief. "Are you insane? We need to stabilize him here. Moving him could make it worse." She stepped closer, her voice icy. "This is a pure nightmare, Roman." Roman's eyes blazed with anger. Damn the purr. There's a man's life at stake. The tension was palpable. In the background, the wailing alarms seemed to mimic the panic and chaos that had engulfed the factory. A group of workers managed to stop the machinery, and with combined effort, they freed Jake, whose face had turned an ashy gray. The floor beneath him painted a gruesome picture in red. Roman, shirt sleeves rolled up and hands smeared, turned to Felicia, his voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't about PR. This is about a life. This is about cutting corners, pushing limits, and treating human beings like mere numbers on a sheet." Felicia's lips thinned and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. A few workers, realizing the immediate danger of leaving him on the conveyor, quickly and with strength born from adrenaline, pulled Jake's limp body off the machinery. Without waiting for an ambulance, they decided to take matters into their own hands. They hoisted Jake's form, using shirts and jackets as makeshift tourniquets to stem the bleeding. A trail of crimson remained on the factory floor, a haunting testament to the accident. Workers would later speak of the grim streak in hushed tones, forever etched in their memories. The factory floor, usually a buzzing hive of activity, was eerily quiet. Workers moved in hushed, cautious steps, their conversations stifled whispers, their gazes frequently darting to the spot of the accident. The stain had been cleaned, but the memory was fresh, its impression indelible. Felicia stood at the head of the long conference table, her posture rigid, face emotionless. Flanking the table were senior managers, engineers, and Roman, his face betraying a storm of emotions. "We cannot afford another accident," Felicia began, her voice cool and controlled. "The board is concerned about the damage to our reputation." "Reputation?" Roman laughed bitterly, leaning forward. "Jake's still in the hospital, fighting for his life, and you're worried about reputation?" Felicia shot him a cold glance. "Roman, this is a business. We have shareholders, stakeholders. And what about the workers?" "Aren't they stakeholders too?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "You talk about damage control when we should be discussing safety protocols, hazard mitigation." She clenched her jaw. "I suggest you watch your tone." "The tone of truth," Roman shot back. "You've pushed these people to the brink, cutting costs on safety gear, forgoing equipment maintenance. You've created a time bomb, Felicia. Jake was just the first to suffer." "You're out of line, Roman," she snapped, her facade crumbling. He stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "This isn't about lines or boundaries. This is about lives. How many more have to get hurt before you wake up?" She met his glare, her voice icy. "You're fired." A collective gasp filled the room. Roman smirked, the dark humor evident in his tone. Felicia's eyes narrowed. "You always were a liability, with your constant pushback and holier than thou attitude. Pack your things and leave." He leaned close, his voice dripping with contempt. "Remember, Felicia, karma has an uncanny way of balancing the scales. And when it comes for you, don't say I didn't warn you." With that, Roman turned on his heel and walked out, the weight of the injustice pressing on his shoulders. But as he left the building, there was a sense of liberation, a freedom from the chains of corporate greed. In the quiet of his car, Roman took a moment to breathe. The past clashed with the present, the raw wounds of the accident, juxtaposed against the promise of the open road and the adventure with Julia. There was a world beyond the confines of the factory, and he was determined to explore it. The challenges of the journey ahead seemed like a mere speck in comparison to the behemoth of corporate callousness he had just left behind. The tires of the RV crunched over gravel as Roman maneuvered it into the driveway of their son's suburban home. Julia leaned forward, squinting, trying to decipher the silhouettes moving behind the living room curtains. "Did they get a new dog?" she murmured, noticing the frenetic shadow play. Roman chuckled. At this rate, they might have gotten a zoo. As they stepped out, the quiet of the evening was shattered by the sudden blaring of the Beatles' Twist and Shout. The front door of the house flew open, and a horde of joyous faces spilled out, holding sparklers that pierced the night with their incandescent glow. Banners reading, "Happy Retirement, Roman," fluttered in the evening breeze. "Ambush," Roman declared, raising his hands in mock surrender. Julia laughed, her earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Well, this is a sneak attack I can live with." Their son, Julian, raced over, a wide grin plastered on his face. "Thought you could quietly retire and sneak into town, huh?" Roman looked genuinely puzzled. "Little birdie told me," Julian winked, nodding towards Julia. "Traitor," Roman mock accused, pulling Julia into a gentle headlock and planting a kiss on her forehead. "As friends, Old colleagues and distant relatives flocked around the couple. Roman was struck by the contrast. Earlier, the world seemed like a grim, ruthless place, devoid of compassion. Now, surrounded by a sea of familiar faces, bathed in the warmth of genuine affection, that dark reality faded. Amidst the revelry, a former coworker, Eddie, clinked his beer bottle against Roman's. "Never thought I'd see the day, Roman. You free from the grind." Roman smirked. "Neither did I. It took a little." Eddie chuckled, heard about the showdown with Felicia. Roman rolled his eyes. "Let's not glorify it. I'm just glad to be out and on the road." "Where to first?" Roman glanced at Julia, dancing with their grandchildren, her face radiant. "Wherever she wants," he declared. Julia sauntered over, overhearing the conversation. "How about somewhere with no factories in sight?" Both men laughed. The evening rolled on, the dark shadows of the past pushed away by the light of the present. The RV, which had witnessed their ups and downs, stood sentinel outside, waiting for the next chapter of their journey. The din of the party, with its laughter and clinking glasses, was momentarily disrupted by Roman's booming voice. "Gather around! Gather around! Time for the grand tour!" Julian, Roman's son, looked up, eyebrows raised in playful skepticism. "What's got the old man so giddy? Selling timeshares now, are we?" Julia winked. "Just you wait. He's been practicing this tour for weeks." Julia and Roman approached their temporary home, an older classic camper. Its cream exterior bore faint scratches reminiscent of adventures from a bygone era. The windows, though large and squared, were framed with a touch of Art Deco style. Rustic chrome embellishments glinted here and there, hinting at its age. But this camper wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a blend of old and new. "I always loved this contrast," Julia mused, running her hand over the smooth surface of the camper's latest tech gadget, juxtaposed next to the textured, worn-out wallpaper. Roman smiled, nodding in agreement. It's like stepping back in time, but with a foot still in the present. They both shared a look of contentment, appreciating the blend of history and modern comfort that their classic camper provided. The guests, drinks in hand, congregated around the gleaming behemoth of an RV, aptly named the Titan. It was a far cry from the rickety campers Roman had grown up with. Its polished surface reflected the evening lights, giving it an ethereal glow. A friend from the back shouted, "Going off the grid." "What did you do, Roman?" Roman laughed. "Well, if I told you, then I'd have to take you with me." As chuckles spread through the crowd, Roman opened the ERV door and beckoned everyone in. The interior was a mix of rustic wood and sleek modern tech. Ambient lighting cast a soft glow, and the furnishings hinted at luxury without being ostentatious. Julian, ever the tech enthusiast, was drawn to the dashboard. "Is that the Legion 600? He asked, his voice a mix of awe and envy. "The very same," Roman boasted, patting the GP's console. "State of the art. Supposed to be smarter than half my old team at the factory." Julia muttered, "Wouldn't set the bar too high there." A few close friends stifled their giggles. Julian shook his head in wonder. "Man, Dad, this thing's more equipped than my apartment. Remember that old piece of junk camper we had? The one where the door would fall off if you sneezed." Roman chuckled. "I'd hoped you'd forgotten that. But look how far we've come." The atmosphere in the RV was warm, filled with laughter and camaraderie. Yet, beneath the light-hearted jests, there was an undercurrent of deeper emotions. Roman's pride in the RV was more than just about the vehicle. It was a manifestation of his dreams, his resilience, and his desire to give Julia the adventures they had always planned. Taking a moment away from the tech admiration, Julian met Roman's gaze, his eyes softening. "Dad, I'm really proud of you, you know." Roman, usually stoic, felt a tightness in his throat. Thanks. Son, now how about we test that GPS tomorrow? Fancy a little father. Son road trip. Julian smiled. Try and stop me. The party had a certain rhythm, the highs of loud chatter followed by the mellow lulls. It was during one of these quiet moments, with the hum of conversation forming a soft background, that Roman gestured for Julian to join him by the tree line. Got something for you, Roman said, reaching into a bag and pulling out a sleek, folded drone. Its matty black surface seemed to absorb the evening light. Julian's eyes widened, surprise evident. Isn't this the Skyscape X9? Dad, these are expensive. Roman shrugged, chuckling. Julian, holding the drone, was clearly moved. It's incredible, Dad. Before Roman could answer, Julian reached into a cooler bag at his feet. Well, I've got something for you too, though it's a little less high-tech. He pulled out a white box tied with a red ribbon bearing the embossed logo of Eidos. Roman's grin stretched ear to ear. Eidos pastries. Damn, son. You sure know how to bribe your old man. It's not a bribe, it's a trade, Julian retorted with a smirk. Every time we had a victory, a milestone, we celebrated with these. They're home, they're us. Julia, having overheard, walked over, her hand on Roman's shoulder. Always about food with you two, she teased. Julian handed her a pastry. Can you blame us? As they all savored the sweet flavors, a quiet contentment settled over the trio. Here, amidst the vast expanse of their journey, with all its uncertainties and hardships, was a small moment of pure, unadulterated joy. The pastries weren't just a taste of home. They were a bridge, connecting past joys to present challenges and future hopes. Roman took another bite, cherishing the taste and the memories it evoked, to adventures, old and new. To adventures, Julia and Julian echoed. The RV's interior was awash with the soft gold of morning light. Gently nudging the sleeping couple awake, Roman's eyes fluttered open first, the residual buzz from last night's surprise still lingering. He turned to Julia, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. She mumbled, rolling closer into him. Morning already? He chuckled. Feels like we've stolen a few hours of sleep from Father Time himself after last night. Julia sat up, stretching her arms above her head. Speaking of time, we should get moving. Lena's expecting us. She paused, her face reflecting a blend of excitement and apprehension. It's been too long. Roman nodded, reaching for the coffee pot. She's got your fire, you know, and my stubbornness. A dangerous combination. He flashed a grin. Julia laughed. Oh, don't I know it. Remember her first bike. Refused help. Scraped her knees a dozen times. But by evening, she was riding like the wind. Or that time she tried to cook us breakfast in bed, Roman chuckled, recalling a plate of burnt toast, raw eggs, and an overturned milk jug. Julia shuddered playfully. Don't remind me. But she tried, and that's what mattered. Silence settled, thick with unsaid feelings and memories. Roman broke it. Let's set the course then. He approached the dashboard, activating the Legion 600. Its holographic display came alive, casting a faint blue glow. Set destination. Lena Mason. The AI responded with a crisp, almost eerily human voice. Destination set to Lena Mason's residence. Estimated time of arrival. 5 hours and 23 minutes. Safe travels, Roman and Julia. Julia raised an eyebrow, looking slightly perturbed. Since when did it get so? Roman shrugged its state of the. As the RV roared to life, the two settled into their seats, the anticipation of the reunion ahead, injecting a new energy into the journey. The road stretched endlessly before them, promising more memories, challenges, and moments of pure joy. They were on their way to embrace them all. The sun blazed overhead, transforming the highway into a mirage of shimmering illusions. The scenery began to shift, the familiarity of the suburbs giving way to the rugged wild. Distant hills, speckled with trees, loomed large, their shadows playing tricks on the eye. Julia squinted, looking around. Did we take a scenic route I wasn't aware of? Roman leaned into the wheel, his grip tightening. According to Legion, this is the quickest route, but I don't remember passing through here when we last visited Lena. Julia leaned over the console, trying to make sense of the holographic map Legion projected. You trust this thing too much. I mean, look at this, she pointed to the path highlighted. It seems to be taking us around in loops. Roman chuckled, albeit nervously. Maybe it's taking us on a scenic diversion, to enjoy the beauty of nature. But as the minutes turned to hours, their amusement gave way to unease. The smooth asphalt became gravel, and then at points, just dirt tracks. Trees formed a dense canopy overhead, making the midday seem like twilight. Julia looked out the window, noting the absence of other vehicles or any sign of life. Where the hell is this thing taking us? It's like we're heading into the heart of the wilderness. Roman's face tightened. He pressed the communication button. Legion. Are we still on course to reach Lena Mason's residence? The AI responded, continuing on the optimal path to destination. Lena Mason's residence. Stay on the current route. Julia snorted. Optimal for who? A mountain goat. Look at this. She gestured at the narrowing road ahead. Soon, we'll need a machete more than a vehicle. Roman tried to laugh off the tension. You always said you wanted adventure. Here you go. She shot him a look that could wither roses. This isn't Indiana Jones, Roman. I'd prefer my adventures without potential. Death. A particularly rough bump jolted the RV. Roman grunted, I'm beginning to think modern tech might be overrated. Julia leaned back, attempting to find humor in the situation. I guess every maze has its minotaur. In our case, it's an AEGP's named Legion. They exchanged uneasy glances, hoping that the labyrinth Legion had thrown them into wouldn't turn their adventure into a nightmare. The distant rumbles of thunder echoed the dread, mounting in their hearts. Trees, looking as ancient as time itself, bordered the deteriorating path, their towering forms blocking out most of the already waning daylight. Each crunch of gravel under the RV's tires was a stark reminder of how far they were from the familiar. Roman, maybe we should turn around. Julia's voice was steady, but her knuckles, white against the seat's fabric, betrayed her anxiety. We can't, love. The road's too narrow. I'll find a spot to make a U-turn. But first, we need to call Lena. Let her know we might be late. Julia grabbed her phone, her face falling even further when she saw the no signal icon. You've got to be kidding me. No bloody service out here. Roman pulled out his phone, hoping for a miracle. But it was the same story. Seems like Legion's taken us off the grid completely. Their exchange was cut short by a sudden, loud pop that rocked the RV. The vehicle lurched dangerously to one side, throwing Julia against the window. Hold on! Roman shouted, struggling to maintain control as the RV skidded along the road, finally coming to a halt, tilted awkwardly. Breathing hard, Julia whispered, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Please tell me that wasn't what I think it was. Roman leaned over, peering into the side mirror. The deflated rubber of the blown-out tire was unmistakable. Damn it, it's the rear left tire. The initial shock gave way to a frantic rush. Roman unbuckled. Stay inside. I'll check if the spare's any good. No, I'm coming with you. It's safer if we stick together. As they stepped out, A cold gust of wind slapped them. Dark, foreboding clouds raced across the sky, masking what was left of the sun. A few rogue raindrops splattered against Roman's face. "Of course," he muttered, "because things weren't challenging enough." Julia tried to inject some humor into the dire situation. "Well, when we said we wanted an adventure, we forgot to specify the non-catastrophics part." Roman, while inspecting the RV's undercarriage, chuckled. "I'll remember to be more specific next time." He paused. "The spare seems all right, but changing it on this uneven road will be tricky." Lightning lit the horizon, quickly followed by the ominous grumble of thunder. Julia sighed. If those clouds are any indication, we're about to get drenched. Roman wiped the sweat and grime from his brow, looking skyward. When it rains, it pours. Huh. Let's get to work before that storm does. Their banter, dark and humorous, masked the undercurrent of fear. But together, in that desolate place, they faced the unknown, proving that even in the darkest moments, humor and love can provide the faintest glimmer of hope. The first drops were innocent enough, a soft pattering against the RV's roof. But nature's capriciousness was soon on full display as the skies split open, unleashing a deluge. The dust road quickly turned into a muddy mess, with puddles deepening into small ponds. The RV's tires churned the mud, creating a slippery trap that prevented any progress. Roman tried to rev forward, but the vehicle only lurched dangerously, refusing to budge. Rain pelted the ground, turning the dry desert sand into a mucky sludge that clung to their shoes and clothes. The storm showed no mercy, wind howling like a wounded animal, whipping sand and rain in all directions. "The RV won't make it out of this mess," Julia shouted, trying to make herself heard above the roaring storm. She glanced at the car attached to the RV. "We need to get it detached. It's lighter, faster. We might stand a chance." Roman nodded in agreement, determination flashing in his eyes. "All right, let's do this." He moved to the connecting mechanism, hands fumbling as the rain obstructed his vision. Julia tried to shield him, using her body as a barrier against the onslaught. They grunted and shouted, frustration building with each passing second. But finally, with a loud snap, the car was free. "Waste no time!" Roman yelled, pulling Julia into the car. They were drenched, water dripping off their faces as they slammed the doors shut. The roar of the rain on the metal roof was deafening. Roman revved the engine and the car lunged forward, tires struggling for grip on the wet terrain. Julia clutched the sides of her seat, eyes darting back and forth from the route ahead to the RV growing distant in the rearview mirror. After a shaky start, the car found its pace, eating up the distance as they sped through the downpour. There was a brief moment of triumph, a shared glance between them that screamed, "We'll make it." But as the adrenaline began to fade, a sinking realization hit Julia. "Roman, the supplies." She fumbled with the glove compartment. Then the back seat, her heart racing. The water, the meds. They're still in the RV. Roman's grip on the steering wheel tightened, the color draining from his face. Damn it, we were so focused on getting out. We didn't think. Julia's face mirrored his distress. But just as Roman was about to make a U-turn, a sputtering sound caught their attention. The dashboard lights flickered and the car began to lose power. "No, no, no," Roman muttered, pressing the gas pedal repeatedly. But the car responded with a feeble jerk before coming to a complete stop. The engine died, leaving them in the midst of an unforgiving storm, isolated and vulnerable. Julia buried her face in her hands, the weight of their desperation pressing down. The rain on the car's roof, once a rhythmic comforting sound, now seemed to mock them. The torrential rain was relentless, each drop seeming to hit the roof of the car with the force of a stone. The vast openness of the surroundings amplified the feeling of isolation. with only the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the otherwise impenetrable darkness of the wilderness around them. Julia's fingers were wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, her eyes darting, trying to find a clear path through the storm. The headlights barely pierced the deluge, the rain warping their beams into a blurry haze. Roman sat rigidly in the passenger seat, every muscle tensed. "Are you sure about this, Jules?" He yelled over the roar of the rain and the rumbling thunder. "We could have stayed in the camper." Julia's voice was a mix of determination and fear. "It's flooded. Roman, we can't just wait this out. We need to find higher ground." The car's tires struggled for grip on the mud, soaked ground, sliding precariously with each twist and turn. With every jolt, Roman's hand would instinctively reach out, trying to steady Julia, though he knew there was little he could do to help. The wilderness around them felt oppressive, the storm masking whatever might be lurking just out of sight. The weight of their predicament was palpable in the confined space of the car, the only barrier between them and the fury of nature outside. Rain pelted the car, the rhythmic drumming a sharp contrast to the car's faltering engine. Sheets of water were thrown up by gusting winds, turning the barren landscape into a blurry wash of grays. The engine stuttered, its former purr replaced with a jarring splutter. Julia's eyes widened, staring at the dashboard as several warning lights illuminated. The engine gave one last gasp before succumbing to silence, with only the rain to fill the void. Roman's jaw tightened, and in a desperate bid, he attempted to reignite the engine. The dismal whirring of the starter motor, growing fainter with each try, indicated the dying battery. "Not now," he muttered, voice barely audible over the storm's roar. After the fourth failed attempt, his patience snapped. With a growl of frustration, he hit the steering wheel, his anger resonating inside the car. "Damn this." He flung the door open, exposing himself to the torrential downpour, and stepped out to check the battery. Raindrops pelted his skin, soaking him in seconds. Julia, despite the onslaught of rain, didn't want to remain a passive spectator. She pushed the door open and stepped out, determined to stand by Roman. But as her foot landed on the rain-slicked ground, it found a concealed rock. Her ankle twisted unnaturally, the crack of the bone nearly drowned by the storm. The pain was blinding, immediate. It felt as if a hot rod had been driven through her leg. She screamed, dropping to the ground, clutching her injured ankle. The bone, while not breaking the skin, formed a grotesque bulge beneath. Roman's head whipped around, his fury forgotten. "Julia!" he yelled, battling the storm to reach her, his heart lurching in a mix of guilt and terror. The desert night was a cruel irony. Outside, darkness sprawled infinitely, barely disturbed by occasional howls of distant creatures. Inside the car, a suffocating humidity clung to every surface, condensing on windows and turning the leather seats sticky. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered. It seemed as if the very air inside was imbued with their desperation. Julia's ragged breathing echoed in the closed confines. Each inhalation was a testament to the pain coursing through her. Her ankle, grotesquely swollen, had taken a purplish hue, an ominous contrast to her pale skin. The bone hadn't pierced through, but the internal injury was agonizingly evident. Every movement, even a slight shift, sent lances of pain shooting up her leg. Roman looked over from the driver's seat, shadows from the dim overhead light dancing on his face. They deepened the lines of worry that had set in. He reached out, taking a cloth dampened with the little drinking water they had left, and dabbed Julia's forehead. The cold touch seemed to offer a fleeting relief, and she moaned softly. "It's going to be okay, Jules," he whispered, trying to inject confidence into his voice. But the crack in his tone betrayed his mounting fear. She looked up, her eyes glazed with pain, but also with something else, a raw vulnerability. "I'm scared, Roman," she murmured, her voice quivering. He gripped her hand, squeezing it. "We'll get through this, I promise." Hours melded into one another, indistinguishable. At some point, Julia's pain gave way to fevered delirium. She'd mutter unintelligibly, sometimes crying out. Other times, she'd gaze emptily at the roof, lost in a world of her own. Roman, battling his rising panic, would murmur soothing words, sing fragments of childhood lullabies, or recount happier memories. But deep down, he felt a helplessness gnawing at him. Occasionally, he'd step out of the car, scanning the horizon for any hint of a passing vehicle or the lights of a distant town. But there was only the oppressive expanse of darkness. The isolation weighed on him, the silence outside contrasting sharply with Julia's whimpers inside. It whispered insidiously, hinting at the bleakness of their situation and fanning the flames of doubt and guilt. As dawn approached, a mutual weariness seeped into them. Their interactions became fewer, punctuated by longer stretches of silence. The air, still damp, felt heavier, and the confines of the car seemed to close in on them. The tangible pain and humidity became secondary to the mental fog enveloping them, the beginning of a slide into desolation and despair. The storm outside raged like a wild beast, the car becoming a tin can amidst its fury. Each gust of wind rocked the vehicle, making them feel inconsequential against the backdrop of nature's wrath. Julia's breath fogged up the window pane as she stared into the unending darkness. "We've been in tight spots before, haven't we? This is just another one of those." Roman forced a laugh, the sound coming out more bitter than he intended. "Remember when we got lost in that forest? No compass, no signal. Just you, me, and that damn sense of direction I brag about." She smirked. "The same one that got us stuck here, you mean?" His chuckle was genuine this time. "That's the one." Silence settled in, punctuated only by the car's ticking engine and the rain's incessant drumming. The air grew colder, and Julia began to shiver. Roman rubbed her arms, trying to generate some warmth. "You think we'll make it out of this one, Rom?" she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He leaned closer, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Hey, we're the couple that managed to get through a 2-week vegan diet challenge for a bet. This is nothing." She laughed, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Oh God, I'd kill for a steak right now." "I'd offer you my arm, but it's more gristle than meat," he joked, rolling up his sleeve in mock gesture. She playfully swatted him, always the charmer. They huddled closer, their breaths synchronized in the deafening silence that followed. The storm outside continued unabated, but the tempest within them began to calm. Through shared stories and laughter, they found solace. The hours crept by, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Despite the levity, underlying fears lingered. "We have each other," Roman murmured, his voice cracking. "That's all we've ever needed." Julia nodded, her throat tight. "Always." Outside, the storm showed no sign of abating, but inside the car, 2 hearts beat in unison, refusing to be broken. The first streaks of dawn painted a bruised sky. The early sun filtering through the rain, splattered windshield of their stranded car. Roman, with tired eyes, watched as the world around them came into focus. The road ahead was a mire of mud, and the once gentle slopes on either side were now slippery embankments. Julia stirred beside him, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her face, once radiant, was now pale, every wince deepening Roman's guilt. Her leg, awkwardly angled, reminded him of the severity of their situation. Julia caught him staring, and her voice, weak but laced with sarcasm, cut through the tense silence. "You always did like my legs, though I'm pretty sure you preferred them in better shape." He grimaced, forcing a smirk. "Always had a thing for your adventurous side, though I must admit this isn't exactly what I had in mind." She coughed lightly, trying to lighten the mood. Romantic getaway turned survival show. I swear, if I see one camera crew pop out, I'm going to... She winced, pain flashing across her eyes. The frivolity of their banter quickly faded. Roman reached over, pressing gentle hand against her forehead. You're burning up, Jules. I'm fine, just a fever. She tried to dismiss it, but he could hear the worry in her voice. Julia, Roman began, choking back his emotions. I shouldn't have let us get into this mess. She took a shaky breath. You didn't do this alone. But, Roman, you need to find help. I can't walk and... He nodded, the weight of their predicament settling heavily on him. We still have no signal, but maybe if I can get to higher ground, I might catch something. Her hand found his, squeezing it. He leaned over, pressing a kiss on her forehead, tasting the salt of both their worries. You rest. I'll be back. Roman, fighting the lethargy from dehydration and stress, opened the door. As it creaked, the morning silence was punctuated by distant crows, their calls an eerie backdrop to the grim horizon. The world might have been breaking around them, but inside that car, two spirits, though strained, refused to snap. With a heavy heart and the burden of their survival on his shoulders, Roman began his trek, the sun's rays casting long, haunting shadows. The midday sun pierced the haze, its harsh light making the car an oven. Sweat dripped from Roman's brow, his eyes darting around, lost in a mirage of distorted memories. The car's confines transformed, replaced by the cold, steel walls of the factory. He could hear the distant clatter of machinery, the sound muffled by the incessant buzzing in his ears. An unfamiliar, yet haunting silhouette emerged from the industrial mist. A new hire, young and eager. Her face twisted in panic, a scream echoing through the factory as machinery malfunctions, the muffled shriek only intensifying Roman's distress. No, no, no. Roman's voice was raw, his hands shaking, reaching out to a past he could never change. The metallic taste of guilt and despair lingered in the back of his throat. Julia, her own pain a gnawing presence, tried to ground him. Roman, look at me. It's not real. Come back to me. But Roman was trapped, drowning in his regrets. I should have done something. I should have. She forced herself to sit up, gritting her teeth against the blinding pain in her ankle. Roman, snap out of it, she pleaded, her fingers brushing his cheek. The touch, warm yet fragile, broke through the veil. Roman's eyes snapped to hers, the terror still evident but recognition slowly flooding back. Jules, I saw her, the girl from the factory. I couldn't save her. Julia's eyes filled with tears. I know, Roman, but you can't drown in that memory. You have to be here, with me now. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her own pain at bay. We both have our ghosts, but right now we need to be each other's anchors. Roman, taking a shaky breath, pulled Julia close. They clung to each other, their respective nightmares clawing at the edges of their consciousness. The car, surrounded by the vastness of their predicament, became a vessel of memories, some beautiful and some haunting. But in that fragile embrace, amidst pain and haunting memories, they found a sliver of hope, a momentary refuge from the storm of their past. Inside, a spacious living room dominated by a rustic fireplace. Sunlight bled through the sheer curtains, revealing floating dust particles. Echoes of the previous night's celebrations were scattered across the floor. Crushed paper plates, spilled drinks, and the remnants of laughter. But the jovial atmosphere was long gone, replaced by a thick tension. Julian, Roman and Julia's son, fumbled with his phone, dialing his sister's number for what seemed like the 100th time. The line buzzed momentarily before her voice cut through Lena. They haven't arrived. It's not like them to just vanish. Something's wrong. Lena's voice, strained with a night of restless worry, responded, "Julian, they left your place headed for mine. It's a straight shot. There's no way they should have taken this long." Julian leaned against the cold wooden table, his mind darting to the Legion, 600 GPs they'd been so fascinated with the previous day. Could it have malfunctioned, led them astray? Or worse? Lena trailed off, imagining dire scenarios. Julian cut her off. "No, let's not go there. We need to think clearly. I'll contact the local authorities." The next few hours became a blur of calls, red tape, and frustratingly vague responses. The sheriff's department was apathetic, citing that the couple hadn't been missing long enough to warrant immediate concern. In her home 100 miles away, Lena paced, her frustration evident. "It's been nearly a day, Julian. We can't wait on them. We need to do something now." Julian gritted his teeth, the palpable weight of helplessness pressing down. "We will. I've got the drone Dad gave me. If they went off road, it might be able to spot them." Lena's voice trembled, a blend of hope and fear. "And if we find them, what then?" "We go to them, sis. We bring them back." As the sun continued its descent, casting elongated shadows across the floor, the two siblings embarked on a desperate mission of their own, determined to defy the odds, bureaucracy, and the vast unknown to find their missing parents. The room, once filled with joy, now echoed with a silent promise of a search that would not end until the family was reunited. Inside the confining space of the car, two souls succumbed to the torturous effects of their respective ailments, amplifying their isolation amidst the vast wilderness. The heavy air, ripe with humidity, hung thick and damp, its weight almost tangible. It was a silent tableau of suffering, each in their own hell yet bound by a shared ordeal. Roman's face, once flushed and determined, had now turned a ghastly shade of pale. Every swallow felt like sandpaper, his parched throat craving the relief of even a single drop of water. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, but there wasn't enough hydration left in him for it to break. The throbbing in his head played a cruel percussion, a constant rhythm that clouded his thoughts and skewed his sense of time. Waves of nausea came in bouts, making his stomach churn, but there was nothing left in him to expel. Vertigo made the world tilt and shift, pulling the horizon to dizzying angles. It wasn't just the physical symptoms. His mental state had begun its tragic descent. Memories jumbling, thoughts fragmented, the boundaries between reality and delusion growing perilously thin. Beside him, Julia's ordeal was no less harrowing. The unmistakable heat of fever radiated off her. Her skin, usually smooth and soft, was now clammy to touch. Chills racked her body intermittently, making her teeth chatter even in the stifling heat of the car. The arthritis in her joints flared up, causing her fingers to curl into painful claws, adding to her misery. But it was her ankle, swollen and misshapen, that was the epicenter of her torment. Each pulse was a sharp reminder, a burning, biting sensation that no amount of gritting her teeth could alleviate. Periodically, she would lapse into a fever-induced delirium, murmuring incoherent fragments of conversations, lost in a haze of memories and dreams. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, twin pools of suffering seeking solace and understanding, but words had long since abandoned them. The car had transformed into an iron maiden of sorts, a cruel cage of torment. Every groan of its frame, every drip of rain on its roof, a stark reminder of the ordeal they were going through. And as day turned into night and night into day, the line separating the siblings from utter despair became thinner and more fragile. With the fierce midday sun burning overhead, Julian popped open the trunk of his sedan, revealing the sleek design of the gifted drone, its matte finish shimmering slightly. He powered it on, its propellers stirring the dust at his feet. Lena leaned against the car, her face a mask of anxious anticipation, the harsh lines of fatigue evident. How long will it last? Julian replied, checking the drone's controls. If we're lucky, a couple of hours. We just need a hint, a clue, anything. Lena exhaled, her fingers unconsciously twirling a strand of her hair, a childhood habit she had never outgrown. Okay then, let's get started. The drone lifted off, its camera sending back a live feed to Julian's tablet. The landscape sprawled before them, a mosaic of dirt roads, withering trees, and the occasional abandoned farmhouse. They watched, eyes tracing every potential landmark, every sign that their parents might be near. As the sun drifted towards the horizon, casting the land in a fiery hue, the weight of their search became undeniable. The drone's camera captured breathtaking vistas that, under any other circumstance, would have been mesmerizing. But now, they only emphasized the vastness of the task, the needle, in a haystack impossibility of it all. Hours passed, with only the hum of the drone and the soft murmur of the car engine's company. The siblings exchanged few words, their focus intent on the tablet screen. Suddenly, Lena's sharp intake of breath cut through the silence. There, by the tree line. She pointed to a glimpse of silver, perhaps the reflection of their RV, or maybe just an illusion. Julian zoomed in, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. But before the image could become clear, the dreaded low battery warning blared. No, not now, Julian cried out, feeling the world collapse around him. Lena's voice, though choked with emotion, was determined. The drone returned to them, its battery almost completely drained. The siblings sat for a moment, the weight of their task pressing in. They had come so far, faced so much, and the journey ahead was still uncertain. But the glimmer of hope, as faint as it was, kept them pushing forward. As the day gave way to twilight, the car roared to life, chasing that last glimpse, that possible beacon. The road stretched on, mirroring their unwavering resolve. The low hum of the car engine accompanied the siblings as they sped down the highway. The purples and oranges of twilight painted the sky, casting the world in an almost surreal hue. Julian gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Lena shot him a weary glance. Julian, this isn't on you. We'll find them, but her voice betrayed the hint of despair she tried so hard to hide. Their journey took them through a small town, and as they passed the local police station, Lena said, let's try them again. Maybe with some face-to-face persuasion, they'll actually help us. Julian nodded in agreement, pulling into the lot. Inside, they were met with the all-too-familiar bureaucratic red tape. We've already explained the situation. Lena's frustration boiled over as she addressed the stern-looking officer. Every moment matters. We need to search now. Officer Daniels, a man with graying hair and a hardened expression, raised an eyebrow. You do understand flying that drone at night, especially over private properties, can get you in trouble. We don't care about fines or getting in trouble, Julian said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. We just want our parents back. A pregnant pause filled the room before Daniels sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, I'll call the properties along the route, get you some permissions. But remember, if anything goes south, it's on you. With a nod of gratitude, they left. Now back on the road, Julian looked over at his sister. We need to recharge the drone, and ourselves too. Lena, her face pale from stress and fatigue, murmured her agreement. They pulled into a gas station, plugged in the drone to charge, and tried to eat something. The silence between them was heavy, weighed down by the pressure of the passing minutes. Gulping down lukewarm coffee, Lena murmured, You remember when Mom used to say, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. Her eyes shimmering with unshed tears met Julian's. He managed a weak smile, Yeah, and Dad would quip. But dawn always comes, doesn't it? She chuckled, the sound both sad and hopeful. We'll find them, Julian. We have to. And with that, they packed up, revved the engine, and sped off into the encroaching darkness. The night was against them, but their determination, fueled by love, was unwavering. The sun cut through the haze, casting shimmering heat waves across the desolate expanse. The land looked like an endless sea of dust and despair. From above, the drone's camera whirred, zooming in and out, meticulously scanning the area. The wind carried the distant echoes of its propellers, a mechanical buzz amidst nature's silence. In their car, Julian's fingers danced across the remote control. Every so often, he'd pause, zooming in on something. A rock formation, an old signpost, a bird taking flight, anything that hinted at signs of life. Lena watched the live footage intently, her heart in her throat. "There!" she suddenly cried, pointing at the screen where, amidst the gray-brown monotony of the landscape, a small glint caught the camera's eye. The reflection from a vehicle's window. Julian immediately adjusted the drone's trajectory, directing it towards the glint. As the camera zoomed closer, the familiar shape of their parents' car emerged. But it was what lay around that raised their anxiety. Mud. Thick, sludgy trails of it, testament to a storm that had swept through and left chaos in its wake. No movement. Julian's voice was barely above a whisper. The car seemed eerily still, its windows fogged up, hiding the world inside. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. "Get closer. Maybe we can see inside." Adjusting the drone's height, Julian brought it down, the camera focusing on the car's windows. But the condensation and reflections played tricks on them, revealing nothing. "We need to get there. Now." Lena's voice wavered, her eyes never leaving the screen. Julian, swallowing hard, nodded, setting the drone to autopilot to follow their car. They sped off, the horizon stretching out before them, hope and dread waging a fierce battle in their hearts. As the miles blurred by, the weight of uncertainty pressed on. But both clung to one thing: the sight of that familiar vehicle. It wasn't much, but in a world where darkness threatened at every corner, that glimmer on the horizon was a beacon they refused to let dim. The inside of the car had transformed into a torturous chamber, echoing with soft whimpers and ragged breaths. The oppressive humidity seemed to press down on them, mingling with their exhalations and creating an atmosphere thick with despair. Roman, slumped against the door, felt as if every cell in his body was screaming for water. His lips cracked and bleeding, felt 2 sizes too big, every movement sending fissures of pain through them. The pulsing in his head had turned relentless, each throb feeling as if a nail was being driven into his skull. With closed eyes, he felt the world swirl and sway, even the slightest movement amplifying his vertigo and making him want to retch. But there was nothing to expel. His stomach had long given up, its hollow emptiness a constant gnawing presence. His cognitive abilities were in free fall, simple thoughts getting tangled past and present, weaving a confusing tapestry. Shadows danced at the periphery of his vision, whispering malevolent promises, making him question reality. Adjacent to him, Julia was ensnared in her own inferno of suffering. Every heartbeat sent a searing jolt of agony up her leg, the broken ankle a grotesque testament to their plight. The skin around the injury was stretched taut, shiny and angry red with hues of purple and blue, painting a vivid picture of trauma. Her fever had climbed to dangerous heights, making her skin burn to touch, her eyes rolling back periodically as delirium took hold. Voices from the past, fragments of happier times, visited her in hazy vignettes, only to be cruelly replaced by the grim present. Chills coursed through her, making her body convulse, each shudder intensifying the throbbing in her ankle. The joints of her fingers locked in painful spasms, her nails digging into her palms, drawing blood. At intervals, she would emit heart-wrenching cries, lost in a world of fire and pain. Roman, in his moments of lucidity, would reach out, trying to offer comfort, but even the softest touch felt like daggers on their hypersensitive skin. The car, their prison, seemed to amplify their suffering, every creak and groan a testament to their despair. Each raindrop that hit the roof felt like a mocking reminder of the water they so desperately craved. The walls of reality were crumbling around them, the abyss of madness and torment beckoning. Inside the stifling confines of the car, the weight of despair was palpable, but it was about to deepen. Roman, already weak and disoriented, felt a sudden vice-like grip around his chest. It wasn't the claustrophobia or the despair that had accompanied him over the past days. It was sharper, more immediate. A crushing pain spread outwards, radiating down his left arm, causing his fingers to tingle and numb. His breathing became labored, each inhalation an agonizing effort. Panic rose in his throat, but it wasn't the impending darkness that truly frightened him. It was the thought of leaving Julia alone in this nightmarish wasteland. As his vision blurred, fragments of a past conversation echoed in his mind. It had been a simpler time, the night filled with stars and the two of them lying on the grass, speaking of life, death, and the universe. "I never want to leave you alone in this world," Julia had said, her voice a whisper in the cool breeze. "And I could never bear the thought of you facing darkness alone," Roman had replied, pulling her closer. Now, as the pain intensified, another sensation coursed through him. Half of his face felt slack, his speech slurred, his thoughts muddled. The realization hit him with clarity amidst the confusion. He was having a stroke. Tears formed in Roman's eyes, not from the physical agony, but the emotional torment. The horrifying imagery of Julia waking up next to his lifeless body haunted him. He remembered their discussions about fate, about destiny, about destiny, about destiny, about ending it on their terms. The seductive allure of escaping the pain, of facing death together, now seemed like a genuine option. The weight of the decision, the very idea of suicide, felt like an additional burden, pressing down on him. He tried to reach out to Julia to convey his thoughts, but words failed him, emerging as incomprehensible mumbles. The world around him started to darken, the edges of his vision closing in. Amidst the encroaching blackness, the memories of happier times flashed, accompanied by the gut-wrenching realization that they might be ending here, in this desolate wasteland, together yet so tragically apart. The relentless sun baked the car's exterior, its once shiny paintwork now dulled by the elements. Inside, the temperature was suffocating. Julia's breathing was ragged, each inhale an act of sheer will. Her once vibrant eyes, now shrouded in pain and delirium, flickered momentarily as she caught the faint silhouette of the approaching drone. Roman's shadow stretched across the back seat, long and distorted. His mind, a tempest of emotions, was fractured by despair, guilt, and an overwhelming need to end their suffering. The harshness of the wilderness outside mirrored his internal chaos. It felt as if each tormented thought clawed at his psyche, urging him toward that final desperate act. As the drone's hum grew louder, mingling with the whipping winds, Julia's gaze began to clear, just a fraction. "Man," she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with a rising panic. Before she could fully process the scene, a deafening gunshot erupted, and the world went silent for Julia. Blood splattered in a grisly fan across the front windshield, each droplet etching a crimson path down the glass. A spiderweb of fractures emerged from the point of impact, marring the transparency and refracting the bleak sunlight in a morbidly beautiful display. Roman's breaths came ragged and tortured. As his emotions spiraled further into the abyss, every ounce of pain, regret, and love he felt for Julia pressed heavily upon him. The weight of their journey, their dreams, and the harsh reality of their predicament bore down on him. He pressed the gun to his temple, closing his eyes for a moment, summoning the courage to pull the trigger. Another gunshot split the air. Behind him, the rear windshield suffered a fate mirroring its front counterpart. Blood sprayed across it, dripping and mingling with the dust of the road they'd traveled. As the cracks snaked outwards, they seemed to tell the tragic tale of a journey cut brutally short. The drone hovered, its electronic eye capturing every harrowing detail. And miles away, witnessing this act of despair through the unemotional lens of technology, Julian and Lena felt the very core of their world shatter. The drone's hum felt almost distant, detached from the grim reality it relayed. The mobile screen on which Julian and Lena watched was initially a window of hope. Now, it became a portal to their darkest nightmare. Lena's fingers trembled, hovering over the end button as if willing herself to cut off the gruesome scene, to make it all go away. But she couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You want to look away, but the horrifying magnetism keeps you rooted. Julian's jaw clenched, the faintest line of a tear tracing the rugged contours of his face. This can't be real, he choked out, his voice breaking. Lena felt a searing pain in her chest, her heartbeat so rapid she feared it might burst. Julian, she murmured, her voice weak. We have to go to them. We have to. Julian stared ahead, unseeing, the weight of the moment pressing him into silence. The bleak landscape around them, painted in muted shades of sorrow, seemed to echo their despair. It was as if the universe had pressed pause, the air thick with grief and shock. Lena's fingers finally hit the end button, plunging them into a silence, only broken by their ragged breaths. Her eyes met Julian's, searching for some semblance of understanding or comfort, but all she found was a reflection of her own pain. Why? Julian whispered, the word barely escaping his lips. Why did they? His voice trailed off, unable to complete the agonizing question. Lena shook her head, her mind racing. We'll never understand. Not fully. But right now, we need to be there. For them. For us. The two stood there, shoulders slumped, consumed by their grief. The cruel irony wasn't lost on them. A journey that began as a celebration of life had taken the most unimaginable turn. Their parents' adventure had become their tragedy. Gathering themselves, they prepared to face the harrowing task ahead. The shadows of the day would cast a long pall over their lives. But in this moment, they clung to each other, their shared pain forging an unbreakable bond. The reddening hue of the dusk sky cast a somber glow on the horizon, the dying light reflecting the heavy emotions that hung in the air. Julian maneuvered the car slowly through the rough terrain, the drone's feed guiding them toward the grim epicenter of their anguish. When the familiar outline of their parents' car came into view, the world seemed to narrow into a tunnel of dread. Each bump and crinkle in the dirt road resonated through their bodies like shockwaves, the finality of the situation sinking in with every rotation of the wheels. Parking a few feet away, Lena hesitated before stepping out. The stillness was suffocating, interrupted only by the distant cries of the nocturnal wildlife. The wind carried whispers of the life that once was as memories flashed in front of their eyes. Julian's knees buckled as he approached the vehicle, the fractured windshield painting a grotesque mosaic of despair. How did we come to this? His voice cracked, despair seeping through each word. Lena, her eyes puffy and red, wrapped her arms around herself. It was supposed to be their escape, Julian. A fresh start. A journey toward something better. Julian looked over at the drone, its blinking lights mirroring the stars overhead. That damn machine. It showed us everything, yet explained nothing. Lena reached out, touching the cool metal of the car door. They were running from something, weren't they? trying to escape their past, their pain. She looked back toward the road they'd traveled, eyes searching for answers that wouldn't come. Maybe the weight of it all just became too much. A bitter chuckle escaped Julian's lips. Isn't that the ultimate irony? You run from your demons only to meet them at the finish line. Lena leaned into him, seeking solace in his proximity. They're free now, she whispered, her words more for herself than for him. Whatever chains held them down, they're broken. The two stood there, side by side, the darkness enveloping them as night took its claim. Grief was a silent companion, its shadow lingering long after the sun had set. The world moved on around them, indifferent to their pain. And yet, in that silence, the bond between the siblings grew stronger, an anchor amidst the storm of their loss. The room was swathed in an uneasy semi-darkness, the dim streetlights casting eerie shadows on the walls of Julian's room. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan seemed to oscillate in rhythm with his labored breathing. His bed, once a place of comfort and respite, had become a battleground. As he closed his eyes, the oppressive weight of the day's events bore down on him, and the haunting dance of his nightmares began anew. The winding road stretched endlessly ahead of him, his parents' car just a dot in the distance. But no matter how fast he ran, he could never catch up. The sun transformed into a monstrous, glaring eye, and the horizon blurred, folding into itself like a twisted carnival mirror. His parents' faces morphed into contorted versions, their voices echoing, distorted. "Why weren't you there, Julian?" His mother's voice, dripping with anguish and accusation, beckoned him. From the shadows, devilish figures emerged, their glee evident in the way they circled him, taunting and laughing, their voices an unbearable cacophony. "Too late," they chanted, the words embedding themselves into his mind, a broken record of failure and despair. He could feel the heat of the drone's camera lens burning into his skin as it captured his every move, each emotion broadcasting his guilt and sorrow for the world to see. He tried to scream, to protest, to apologize, but no words would come out, and the devilish figures only laughed harder. Suddenly, he was back beside the car, the fractured windshield reflecting a grotesque panorama of his haunted psyche. Through the splintered glass, he saw his parents, their eyes vacant, yet accusing, blood staining their clothes in macabre patterns. Cold hands gripped his shoulders, shaking him, the distorted faces of his parents looming large, their voices whispering, "Why, Julian? Why?" With a guttural scream, he jolted upright, bathed in sweat, heart pounding in his chest. The remnants of the nightmare still clung to him, tendrils of despair wrapping around his mind. The room, though, silent, felt alive with the echoes of his torment. Hugging his knees to his chest, he tried to push the horrific images away. But the truth was, no matter how hard he tried, the ghosts of that fateful day would forever haunt his dreams. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sun, casting fragmented patterns on the old wooden floor. Julian stared blankly at them from his armchair, the room's once vibrant color now an oppressive beige. "Mate, you've been in this house for weeks," said his close friend, Finn, as he stepped in, breaking the silence. The worry was evident in his voice. The world didn't end out there, you know. Julian didn't reply, his gaze fixed on a distant point, lost in the haunting echoes of his past. Finn sighed, rubbing his temples. "Listen, I've seen that look. After Afghanistan. Well, I've been there. You need to talk to someone, Julian." Julian's sister, Lena, having overheard the conversation, chimed in. "He's right. We're worried about you. Every night it's the same. The screaming, the pacing. You haven't slept properly in days." Julian finally looked up, eyes bloodshot. "How am I supposed to sleep, Lena? Every time I close my eyes, I see them. I hear them. It's like they're right there, but just out of reach." Lena's face crumpled, a mix of sympathy and pain. We're all hurting, Julian. But drowning in it won't bring them back. They wouldn't want this for you. A silence filled the room, heavy and tangible. You need to get out, Finn finally said. Even if it's just for a walk. See a therapist, something. Julian's resistance was palpable. I don't need some stranger dissecting my mind. Lena knelt in front of him, tears welling up. Julian, please. We can't lose you two. His walls began to crumble. The weight of grief, the suppressed memories, the nightmares, it all came crashing down. He looked at his sister, a reflection of their shared pain in her eyes, and nodded. Okay, I'll try. Later that evening, Julian found himself in a dimly lit office, walls adorned with degrees and calming paintings, the scent of lavender filling the air. Dr. Hannah Klein, a seasoned therapist, sat across from him. He fidgeted, discomfort evident. I don't even know where to start. Dr. Klein leaned forward, her voice soft and empathetic. Start wherever you feel comfortable. Remember, this is a safe space. Julian took a deep breath, his voice shaky. Every night I see them. In the car, the blood. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving his. Trauma has a way of entrenching itself deeply, especially when it's left unchecked. Inside, the subdued lighting of Dr. Klein's office. The room was filled with an almost palpable tension. The ambient sounds of a distant clock ticking and the hum of the air conditioner acted as subtle reminders of the reality around them. Julian sat, his posture taut, fingers fidgeting. Dr. Klein, a seasoned professional, could sense the turmoil boiling beneath Julian's surface. His intuitive nature had served many patients over the years, leading them through their darkest tunnels. Julian, Dr. Klein began, his voice gentle yet firm. This is a space for honesty. Whatever you carry with you, let it out. The journey to healing starts with confronting our truths. Julian took a deep breath, his gaze distant. The day before the trip, I tinkered with the GB settings. I thought it'd be an adventure. I thought. Dr. Klein remained silent, giving Julian the time he needed. It was supposed to be fun, less traffic, more scenic routes, but I never imagined it would lead them into that desolation. If it weren't for that change, maybe they wouldn't have ended up there. Maybe they would still be alive. Julian's voice wavered, choked with emotion. Dr. Klein leaned forward slightly, offering a presence of comfort. Julian, the weight of the world is heavy, but you cannot bear all of it on your shoulders. What happened was a tragedy, but the path to healing begins by acknowledging our feelings, however painful they may be. Julian's eyes, reddened with the onslaught of tears, met Dr. Klein's. It was clear that the road ahead was long and torturous, but for the first time, Julian felt seen, truly seen, and that made all the difference. The psychologist's office was sunlit but felt cool, a soft contrast to the raw intensity of the emotions that ebbed and flowed within its confines. Dr. Reinhardt shifted the notebook on his lap, eyes trained on Julian. You mentioned recurring nightmares, he began, voice carrying that gentle, probing undertone. Julian's fingers clenched involuntarily. Yeah, he responded, voice brittle. Every time I try to sleep, it's like I'm thrown into this maze. It's dark, twisted, and at every corner there are these grotesque, devilish figures. They laugh, mock, and taunt me. It's relentless. Dr. Reinhardt paused, choosing his words carefully. Dreams, especially nightmares, can be our mind's way of processing trauma, stress, and guilt. These devilish figures you see. Describe them. Julian swallowed hard. They're distorted, like humans but not. Their eyes, they burn with an intensity like they're accusing me. Their laughter. It's sinister, as if they're enjoying my suffering. Tapping his pen lightly against his notebook, Dr. Reinhardt considered this. These figures, Julian, they might be a manifestation of your internalized guilt, your self-blame. They are, in essence, your inner demons. Julian blinked back tears. So what? I'm haunted forever by my own psyche. Forced to watch my parents' last moments on a loop. Dr. Reinhardt held up a hand reassuringly. Not forever. The mind is a powerful tool, Julian. While it can trap you in a cycle of guilt and self-blame, it can also be the key to breaking free. Julian stared at him, skepticism evident. There are techniques, Dr. Reinhardt began, that allow us to confront and control these nightmarish visions. One of them is called lucid dreaming. It's where you become aware that you're dreaming and can, to an extent, control the narrative. Julian's brow furrowed. Control the narrative. Dr. Reinhardt nodded. Yes. When you recognize you're in the nightmare, you can challenge these figures. Ask them questions. Demand answers. They are, after all, constructs of your mind. Facing them might help alleviate the intensity of your guilt. Julian's gaze wandered, considering this new information. It sounds, I don't know, too simple. The psychologist offered a sympathetic smile. It won't be a magic wand, but confronting our fears, even in the realm of dreams, can be a step towards healing. It's a process, Julian, and every journey begins with a single step. The room fell silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Julian's eyes met Dr. Reinhardt's. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could wrestle control back from the nightmarish grip of guilt. The morning sun was unapologetically bright, streaming through the gaps in the blinds and casting shards of light onto Julian's face. Today felt different. Not easier, exactly, but different. Pulling himself out of bed, he looked into the mirror. The weariness was evident. The shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and haunting dreams. Yet there was something else, too, a hint of determination that had long been absent. As he sipped his morning coffee, he pondered on Dr. Reinhardt's words from the previous session. The concept of confronting his tormentor's head on in his dreams was daunting, but Julian knew he had to try. He needed an escape from the suffocating weight of guilt, even if it meant walking straight into the belly of the beast. Later that day, he found himself back in the psychologist's room, his now familiar safe space. The walls were lined with diplomas and certificates. The scent of sandalwood hung in the air, and Dr. Reinhardt sat poised, waiting. I've been thinking, Julian began hesitantly, about what you said, about confronting. Dr. Reinhardt's brow quirked slightly, a hint of encouragement. And I want to try it. The lucid dreaming. No. I need to face them. I need to understand why they're there, what they want. Dr. Reinhardt nodded. It's going to be challenging, Julian. I won't lie to you. The mind can be a labyrinth, especially when marred by trauma. But remember, you're not alone in this journey. I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. Julian's voice cracked a little. What if they win? What if they pull me deeper into the abyss? The psychologist leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. They are a part of you, Julian. A dark, painful part, yes, but they don't control you. You have the strength to face them, to challenge them, and to understand them. And to understand them comes the power to move past them. Julian took a deep breath. The road ahead was daunting, littered with potential pitfalls and pain. Yet there was a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could free himself from the oppressive chains of his dreams and find solace in waking life once more. Okay, Julian whispered, determination evident in his voice. Let's begin. Rain drummed against the window pane of the small, dimly lit cafe. Julian, having just left Dr. Reinhardt's office, sat with a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. He was still processing everything, letting the comforting warmth of the mug seep into his fingers, when a tall, slender man entered the cafe. The man's pale face was hidden beneath a dark hat, but his intense gaze quickly found Julian. "May I?" The stranger gestured to the empty seat opposite Julian. Taken aback, Julian hesitated before nodding. The man sat down, and the overhead light revealed a thin, almost gaunt face with sharp features. His piercing blue eyes seemed to be studying Julian intently. "My name is Dr. William," he said, extending a hand. Julian shook it, feeling a cold chill run down his spine. "Julian, do I know you?" William chuckled softly. "No, not directly, but I've been following your case closely. Dr. Reinhardt and I go way back." Julian frowned, the unease growing. William leaned in, his voice a mere whisper. "Because, Julian, I specialize in the darker aspects of the psyche. Those devilish figures you see, the torment you feel. I've encountered them before." Julian's heart raced. "You know about them?" The doctor nodded. "I've studied cases like yours for years. Trauma, guilt, the darkness it manifests. There's more to it than you might think. Dr. Reinhardt is good, one of the best, but his methods only scratch the surface." Julian leaned back, wary. "What are you suggesting?" "That perhaps you and I could work together, dive deeper into the abyss, confront these shadows at their core," Dr. William proposed. Julian frowned, torn. Dr. Reinhardt had been his anchor, yet a part of him was desperate for answers, for a quicker end to the relentless nightmares. Seeing Julian's hesitation, Dr. William added, "Think of it as an alternative, a more intense, direct confrontation. Not everyone is ready for it, but for those who are, the results can be transformative." Julian felt a mix of intrigue and apprehension. "I'll think about it." Dr. William smiled enigmatically, leaving a card on the table. "When you're ready,